Authors. A film director that influences their film so much that we rank them as their authors. The symmetry in Stanley Kubrick films, the violence in Tarantino movies, the melodrama in Ghotok cinema, or the freeze frame scenes in Theo Angelopoulos films. Narrative styles, motifs, or recurring themes marks the make of an author. In this new segment of Filmkopath, we take one director at a time and attempt to analyze their cinema in detail. Analyzing Auteurs, our new segment in Filmkopath.
Today we have with us Professor Sudipto Acharya. Professor Sudipto has studied cinema at FTII Pune with specialization in direction and screenplay writing. He has completed his MA in Film Studies from Jadavpur University, Kolkata. Professor Sudipto has a long engagement with teaching cinema in various institutions like FTII Pune, SRFTI Kolkata, Roopkala Kendra Kolkata, and Kolkata Film and Television Institute, Center for Film Television, Allahabad University. He is currently a senior faculty at Whistling Woods International, Mumbai. He is also part of an artistic research project involving BRICS nations that looks at social interstices with the help of cinema practices. Sudipto sir, thank you for coming. Thank you for giving so much time to us today. We would like to talk about the work of one particular director, and we do not know a better place to start with than with Satyajit Ray, of course, who has been the beacon of Indian cinema around the world. Maybe we can say he put it on the map, he put it on the world map. And you might say, no, Ritwik was there, and I will have to agree with closed hands, but Ray was who popularized we could say, the mainstream.
So if we can start with the basic structure of a Satyajit Ray feature, sir. If you can say, is it the same with any other narrative cinema, or there is a deviation to the way the structure was formulated by Ray?
It is not possible to create a very unified talk about a very unified structure when we look at the entire oeuvre of Ray's films. There were films which had a very, very definite, which was moving towards a very, very definite perspectival point. But there were films which were more about journeys, which were more about exploration. If you look at Pather Panchali itself, it is very episodic in its scope, and it covers very unspecified amounts of time. There are long leaps, so it is not possible to talk about about a unified narrative structure when we are looking at the cinema of Ritwik, of Satyajit Ray. One can make a difference between the stories which Ray himself wrote, with the stories that with the films that he made, from scripts, from existing narratives, from existing films, so if you look at a film like Kanchenjunga, there's a clear sense of movement towards a resolution. There's a clear sense of movement towards a resolution. Or if you look at a film like Kapurush again, you are left with a very, very definite conclusion in the end. So the film is continuously sort of converging towards that perspectival point, and therefore is very, very Western, following the canons of Western narrative structure. But again, if I look at Jalsa Ghar, if I look at Pather Panchali, it's not so. It's more of an exploration, and when we look at the narratives of Vibhuti Bhushan also, it is an exploration of actuality. You are taken into a very place and you start observing reality in extremely classified, in extremely variegated sort of forms, from very minute observations to large observations, and whenever Ray has worked with Vibhuti Bhushan, it is the primacy of the exploration of the visual reality, or the sensory impulses of the visual, that has taken a sort of a precedence over creating what is usually called as conflict or drama or things like that. This is not to say that in Vibhuti Bhushan there is no drama. I'm not saying that, but it does not come to us through the classical notions of conflict, of a clash between two ideas or two entities. It doesn't come to us through binaries. So there is no unified structural form that you can talk of when you are looking at the films of Satyajit Ray. Maybe when you analyze his short stories, what he has written, a huge, rich volume of short stories that he has written, and which continues to mesmerize us even today. Bestseller. It's in the top 10 list of bestseller in Bangla literature today. As much as it was 50 years ago. I think if you analyze his short stories, you will you might find a uniformity of structure.
So as a filmmaker, it's more about following the source material, is what you are saying.
It has varied. He has not limited himself to any one sort of narrative tradition. He is equally aware about folk traditions, about fairy tales, about telling tales as opposed to stories.
If we have to understand the greatness of Ray, which are those three films you will pick up? Which kind of shows why he was the same?
Everybody have different films. If you ask Ray himself, he will say Charulata. See, the greatness of Ray to me is because not because of one Charulata or one Jalsha Ghar or one this or one that. No. The greatness of Ray is because of his films becoming a voice for an entire community for over a long period of time. It is now a cultural artifact in which we can find ourselves, in which, if you have to ask me what is Bengaliness, how am I a Bengali, what it means to be a Bengali, instead of trying to define, in so many words, what is a Bengali, what it means to be a Bengali, I would say go and watch the films of Ray and you will understand what Bengaliness is all about. What the time and space of Bengal is all about, what is the mental makeup of a Bengali, not just the Renassa Bengal, but the post-Renassa Bengal, the Bengal in crisis, the Bengal which has lost all its ideals and has lost its way into a very corrupt practices. So if you have to understand what a Bengali is, you have to go back to Ray. So I think the greatness of Ray is not about one or two or three or four films which stands out, which has been recognized in Cannes or which has been recognized in Berlin or which has been spoken about in very high terms by Indian scholars. Of course, they are there. Of course, they are there. They are our treasure. You know, we need to be proud about them, of those films. But if you ask me, the greatness of Ray is that he managed to sort of marry the concerns of his films with the concerns of his time, of the people of his time, so that, you know, if I need to express myself, I can express myself through the cinema of Ray by quoting. Not too many artists have come, you know, like Rabindranath Tagore or one, or Nazrul, you know, is another, you know, Sharat Chandra is another. We talk with the help of these great artists.
We refer to them.
We refer to them continuously. Similarly, we have great poets in modern time. Like we cannot understand the modern Bengali without reading Jibanananda Das, you know, or Shamar Sen. You know, it is impossible to understand the modern Bengali without reading Shamar Sen or without reading Jibanananda Das. You know, so should we say that the importance of Jibanananda Das was because he wrote one Banalata Sen? No, it does not begin and end with that. It might begin with that. You know, so similarly, you know, I mean, like there are many great filmmakers in the history of cinema. You know, even they're very great filmmakers today. But there's are more of a solo journey. Their films talk for themselves. Many people relate with them. But here is an example where a whole community, a jati, Bangali jati, a whole community, irrespective of your religion. I mean, you don't know how proud Bangladeshis feel about Ray. You know, how proud Bangladeshis feel about Ray. So he's not talking about only the Hindu Bengali or this part of Bengal. Of course, he is located in this part of Bengal. But the awe and admiration with which our other half, the Bangladesh, response to Ray is no less. So he speaks for everyone. He speaks for all Bengali, and that, I think, is his biggest. I mean, that is what makes him what he is. I can give you very specific. I can give you very specific images.
Sure, sir.
Why I'm saying all of that? Why I'm saying all of that? If you have born in Bengal and you have grown up in the 70s with a grandfather or a grandmother in your house, you know, you cannot miss that scene in Pather Panchali where Durga already had her lunch, you know, is now looking greedily at what the aunt is having, and she says, would you like to have one? And she nods, you know. Now you might be, your belly must be filled, but to have something from your grandfather's plate or your grandmother's hands is doubly delicious, is doubly mouth-watering. You know, it is not just the food, it is the love, you know. And I'm telling you, every Bengali who has grown up in the 70s, in the shadow of their grandparents at home, knows what that scene is. Knows, exclaims to himself or herself, This is my scene. This is not Durga, this is me. That Indi Thakuran is my grandmother. You know, so that is a very specific example that I am talking about. We have all gone through that. You know, we have all gone through that.
Right. So, sir, there is no doubt in the mind of anybody about the greatness of Ray. Irrespective of that, there have been certain criticisms, and we do not necessarily agree with them, but we would like to know your point of view. It is that Ray was not very direct about his politics in his cinema. Would you agree to that? Or is it necessary that a filmmaker would be very direct in his politics in his cinema?
I think Ray was very, very cautious when it came to politics. I think he was very, 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 very cautious. He was, as much as he was a cineast of the highest order, I think he was very, very conscious of keeping his hands clean, you know, that there should not be any dirt on his pristine, white, pressed, ironed trouser. If I say it in Bangla, dhutite kono matir daag jeno na lage. So it was a sort of an ivory tower from where he was operating.
It was a conscious decision. Do you think it's a conscious decision from his side?
Of course, it was a conscious decision, and there was a certain comfortness which his elitism allowed him to operate from within, which you know. So he was not willing to have mud and blood and sweat touch his hands. You know, for an artist, the artists that we think of when we think of an artist, your clothes have to have the paint. You know, if I am painting my house, how can my shirt be clean?
Right.
You know, if I'm making, imagine Ram Kinkor Bej making a sculpture with, you know, with mud, with hay, with this, with that, with cement, with mortar. Do you think at the end of the day he is wearing a white dhoti? Somehow, when I look at Ray's films, I find that there is a clinicalness in it. A clinicalness which does not come easily. A clinicalness of a very high order. You know, where everything is measured, everything is word, everything is precise. Look at Charulata. Every grimace, every gesture is measured, weighed. The only other filmmaker that I can think of who can parallel Ray in its measure is maybe Ingmar Bergman or Robert Bresson. But in achieving his clinicalness, he never ventured out into the uncertain waters into the uncertain territories of politics. Right. And therefore, he played it safe, I must say. Not that he was not conscious, not that he was, not that he didn't take sides, but he did that with the panache of a Bhadralok, you know, never hitting the streets. Right. And that is where Mrinal Sen becomes important. That is where Ritwik Ghatak becomes important.
That might be what Ritik was talking to him in Jukti Tokko Goppo, right? That scene we have.
Yes. Of course. I mean, in this, when you're talking of politics, we cannot undermine, we cannot ignore Mrinal Sen also, and he also, threw all care to the wind and came down with a very political image making, where he's not just talking about politics, where his image making comes from a very radical political understanding. He's radicalizing the image in a big way. Who? Mrinal Sen,
So now let's talk a little bit about music in Satyajit Ray's cinema. So during his starting days, of course, Ravi Shankar has worked with him in Pathar Paachali, and later on, he did his own music. So what do you make of it? And how important part was it of the entire narrative of his cinema?
Can be summed up in one phrase: A, B, A dash, B dash, A dash dash, B dash dash, A dash dash dash, B dash dash dash. You know what I'm talking of? That is the structure of a Western symphony.
Mm-hmm.
There are two themes, A and B. So the whole musical piece is nothing but a conflict of A and B. He has said it in so many words that if anybody understands the structure of Western classical music, for him and for her, understanding the narrative structure becomes very easy. He has said that. There are YouTube links, you can find it for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So put in a nutshell, that is what his music is all about. A, B, A dash, B dash, A dash dash, B dash dash. And a progression of this conflict between A and B. I'm sorry, I'm being guilty of oversimplification. Oversimplification. But that in a nutshell is what Ray is, what Ray's music is. And he found it very difficult to come to terms with Indian classical music. Although he has worked with Ravi Shankar, he found it extremely difficult to, unless and until he was trying to use it in a very caricaturish sort of a way. If you look at Hirokraja Deshe, you will know what I am saying, where boredom is connected with Carnatic music. Oh, that is such a politically wrong thing to do, and that is and as if to prove a point, he said the tabla can't fit into cinematic music at all, and we have later realized that tabla has infinite potential in the hands of Ghatak. Indian classical music has really been explored.
Sir, you mentioned about the greatness of Ray, the Indianness or the Bengaliness. But then what is this in him that has inspired, influenced filmmakers over years? Like a contemporary like Kurosawa, or even today, Christopher Nolan is so much inspired by him, who is belonging to a very different league from a different age. So what's that in him that
Martin Scorsese.
Martin Scorsese, right? Yes.
He swears by it.
So what for them attracts is the attraction in Ray?
I think it is his eye for detailing. And this word detailing has been understood very wrongly. Detailing is not always the for itself. An image that merely describes reality does not take us close to reality. It is just a description. Okay. But an image which aspires to hold within it the essence of that reality. The essence of that reality. When you manage to do that, when you manage to capture the essence of that reality, It takes us closer to reality and therefore is born a form called realism. Okay, I'll give you a small example from his um, learning days. You know, you must be knowing that Ray went to Shantiniketan to learn painting, and on the banks of the river Kwai, um, as a class, as a painting student, he was asked to paint cows that were grazing on the green grass, and Binod Bihari, I think, was his teacher. And he made a beautiful sketch of a cow, and the teacher looked at the sketch and says, I can see the cow, but I do not find the cow nest. So now what is the cow nest? And yes, you can clearly see that it is an illustration of a cow. But it is not taking us close to the experience of meeting a cow. You know, it is not the same thing. So that is, I think, one of those early thoughts that has developed within him, that he has so beautifully tried to capture from his very first film in his images, not merely recording space and time, but trying to capture the essence of space and time, which can parallel, which are at the same sort of a height, which are at the same sort of a height as that of haiku poetry. Haiku poetry, if you know, condenses our existence into just 3 images, 2 sounds and 1 visual, or 2 visual and 1 sound. It works with that sort of economy, and I think, and I feel that in the cinema of Ray, we see that sort of condensation of our experience into 1 image, which tells us everything. I mean, if we start with Pather Panchali, I mean, it is endless. It will never end. You know, if you look at these 3 films, the trilogy, Pather Panchali, then comes
Aparajita.
Aparajita, lastly is Opur Sanshar. How many people die in these 3 films? Other than Opu, everybody dies.
Literally.
The sister dies, the father dies, the mother dies, and then finally the aunt dies. Before everybody, the aunt dies, you know, and finally the wife dies. Yeah, 5 people die. You please go and analyze the 5 death scenes, how they are told. Each one of them are different. Each one of them, in terms of its montage, comes to us in a very, very different way. One affects us intellectually, the other leaves us with overtones. That there is, Durga's death is all about tonalities of death, of darkness, of fear, and nothing else. You know? So from very, very strong tonalities, he is going to overtones, to intellectual montage. You know, how is he doing that? The most exciting is when he is creating overtones, when he is creating or when he is dealing with the intellectual montage. You know, for me, of the 5 deaths, the most insignificant and yet the strongest cinematically for me is Indi Thakuran. Narratively, you ask anybody, Durga's death hits you the most, because a young girl, you know, full of life, full of dreams in her eyes, dying, will make any human being sad. You know, will make any human being sad. But if you, for a while, take the narrative aspect away from it, and if you just look at the 5 death scenes per se, the 5 death scenes in themselves, you will find that emotionally and intellectually. There are other more insignificant depth of the in the Thakurar, which does something to you. You know, how it happens? You know, do you recollect one image?
That, you know, the bowl, the ghoti,
Absolutely.
it you know, it kind of, you know, drops and flows towards on the ground.
Towards it floats to the water body.
Yes.
Towards a state of abandonment.
Correct.
Abundant forever. No more to be used. The soul abandoning the body. You know, the relation abandoned long time ago. She didn't find a place in that same house. Yeah, now finally the soul has abandoned. You know, that one single image tells her life, sums up her life. You know, I think it is these details which hits you. You know, how do you tell a whole life in one image? My God, what sort of economy you need? You know, to tell a whole life in one image.
And now that you ask, and I mention, I realize how that has been, you know, kind of staying in my mind. That the moment you kind of bring in the point, I visualize it and I tell you. So that's the greatness, maybe.
Yeah. It also works at a very subliminal level. You may not have been conscious about it, but it has worked on you at an unconscious level. I mean, like, similarly, when Sarbojoya dies, it doesn't happen in front of our eyes. You know, Opu comes back from Calcutta, and there are the camera pans on empty walls. The camera is panning on empty walls, and on the soundtrack, we hear what Opu is calling out to his mother, "Ma, Ma," you know, and it's not being answered. We immediately know that there is somebody lacking here. There's something missing here. And a whole world of vacuum envelops us. You know, it is this sense of vacuum which he creates with that image of the camera panning over empty walls. You know, very, very different from that vessel rolling over in the case of in the Thakurar. Now come to Harihar. You know, what happens when he dies? A flock of pigeons fly. What has pigeons got to do with a man dying? You know, if it is cut to any other, you can come with a very romantic scene also. A boy and a girl making kissing for the first time in a park. No, it will give a very romantic feel, maybe. You know, yeah. But he cuts the death of Harihar with a flock of pigeons, and it immediately connotes very, very different things. You know, see, he is not importing these images from another world. These images exist in that world itself. You know. Right. So this connection which he is making is not a very labored connection. This connection which he is making is happening very organically.
Effortlessly.
Very effortlessly. Yes, very effortlessly. From his surroundings. You know, and he is picking up these things. And I think it is these details. These are not meaningless details. Please understand. This is not details for the sake of details. Details which is at the service of a particular truth, which takes you, which opens a world, a window in front of you, whereby you see a whole life pass by.
Like the sweet vendor comes and Opu and Durga follows him, and there's a dog following them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. A dog. Yeah. Or the hum of the electric pole. You know, when Opu and Durga go to see the train for the first time, they see the electric pole and and Oppo is attentively listening to the very peculiar electrical noise that is emitting from the electric pole. You know, I mean, this is the moment. What is it trying to do in this? What is it trying to do? Why does Oppo has to listen to so attentively listen to an electrical noise? It is nothing but a noise. It is not the chirping of a beautiful chirping of a bird. It is not the song of a village belly. It's a noise. It's an electrical noise. Hum. Why does Oppo have to listen to it so attentively? What is this? What is this detail all about? Shondikhan. It is that moment where a pre-modern society is coming to an end, or a primitive society is coming to an end, and a modern society is about to be born. Before was pre-modernity. Now with the coming of the train, you are no more pre-modern, you are modern. You are now taking one giant leap to modernity. You know, so this sound, this rather I would say the noise, the electrical noise, you know, underlines that liminal moment. That these details take us into bigger horizons.
Right.
You know,
That was so enlightening, sir. That was mesmerizing, I would say.
And before we let you go, I have one last question. And my question is, sir, that when we talk about race cinema, there is a certain female emancipation, like Charulata or Mohanabor. Then again, when he works with children, he doesn't even have a female character. So why do you think he maintained such distinctions within his audience?
you mean not having a female child?
Yes, I mean, when he worked with child actors.
I mean, you know, in his literary works, say Feluda or Shonku, there's no female characters. Even in the films he has made from those, you know, stories of his, there's absolute absence, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very nice observation. Yeah, I have not particularly thought about it, you know. You have to realize, you have to admit that finally Satyajit Ray is a man. So, uh, yeah. So when he's making films about his own experience, you know, and not making films about the girl child. Even when he is talking about emancipation of the woman, he is the emancipation of the woman is being understood in a certain patriarchal ways,
Right.
in a certain patriarchal norm. You know, it is not the emancipation of a woman as experienced, felt, and told by a woman. You know? So there are two things which are working very, 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 very clearly. One is the glorification of the woman through deification, through deifying that women are great, or you have the other woman. You know, you have the fallen woman. So this I think is a very, very simplistic sort of a binary. Ray is also guilty of, you know. We see this again and again in his films. Yeah. We see the former kind more, the one is in which there is a deification, or there is a glorification, you know, that comes to him more easily. The fallen woman, we find examples once or twice, but not much. I think in the City trilogy, he deals with the woman, the other woman. You know? But what I like about his treatment of woman characters is the complexity which he manages to give them. You know, they are not very simple characters. They are not very plain characters. They all have a very complex past, and their sexuality is very strong, and they have a depth which the men in their lives absolutely lack. You know, the men are mostly out of depth in front of the woman. Charulata is a prime example. You know, you look at Charulata and you see that how the two men are absolutely incapable of understanding the depth of feelings which Charulata carries with her, and also the ingenuity of a free thinker, you know, of a thinker who refuses to accept the social norms, the existing structures. But when Charulata starts writing with Amar Gram, you know, the poem, the series which she starts writing, is a shift, is an absolute shift, is breaking of new grounds. So that is the type of depth that Ray gives to his woman characters. Again, in Devi, you know, when you look at a film like Devi, she's being hopelessly deified and she's a prisoner of her circumstances. But I find it is a very interesting characterization. You know, at the moment when she's about to run away, you know, her husband, who lives in the city and is a rationalist and is learning, debating, you know, he believes that with debate, with rational, you can win over anybody, you know, finally gives up. You know, his father defeats him, you know, in his logic. But when the two of them, the husband and the young husband and wife, when they finally decide to run away from their parental house and come to the city, at that very moment, Devi asks this one final ontological question, you know, what if father is right? Jodi Baba ঠিক হয়, যদি বাবার কথা ঠিক. For the first time, you know, you are seeing a crack in her mask, and you are seeing what is going on inside her mind, the churning that is going on inside her mind. You know, for the two other characters, the father-in-law and the husband, they are what they speak. So they are very two-dimensional. They're very two-dimensional. The father-in-law or the father comes from a pre-modern space, is only talking of irrationality. The son who studies in Presidency College comes from a very rational space and represents modernity. Finish. You know, they're very thin, but when you look at the way characterization, when Ray deals with the characterization of Devi, you don't know where to place her, what is going on in her mind. You know, there is much more than what meets the eye. You know, and it becomes very apparent at that very crucial moment when there is a crack. They're about to step out and run away, when she suddenly asks this final question: what if father's words are true? Ami jodi shotti Devi hoi? You know, for the first time you are seeing confusion, questions, turbulence in herself. For the rest of the film, how do you see her? Very calmly going through the
motions.
Obliging.
Yes. You do not understand what is happening beneath it. Now suddenly things open up in front of you and you realize that the calmness is only on the surface. You know, so that is the depth which I find in Ray's woman characters.
Just one more question before we let you go, and it is more of a general question which I want to ask you, because what we are trying to do here is we want more and more people to appreciate cinema, more and more people to watch good cinema, so that in return, good cinema is made. So if I know you do not want to make lists or top 5, top 3, you don't like that. So let me just put it this way. If somebody needs to appreciate, say, Satyajit Ray, what bare minimum, let's not say bare minimum, what would you recommend him to start watching? If somebody is not aware, has not seen the filmography of Ray, and if you want to encourage somebody to start watching Ray, start watching Ghotak maybe, then what would you ask them to see, and what should be their stepping stone?
You know, this is the role of a high priest. You know, like a priest stands between the devotee and the God. You know, let the devotee enjoy the God. You know, be in a. Why do you want me to tell? The films of Ray are there on the internet. Anybody wants to see the films, go and watch and enjoy and get lost in that world. I can tell which films which I continue to enjoy, which continue to surprise them. Films by Ray, of course, the trilogy is there again and again. I discover new things every time. I love George Chagor. I think extremely cinematic film, you know, and a few more films are there, but these are the ones which Charulata, of course, is a textbook for me. I cannot. There are many things in cinema, starting from mise-en-scene to characterization. Devi, for example, characterization in Devi. You know, these are films which have a permanent place in our cultural history.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and it was enlightening for us, and I am sure it will be extremely enlightening for the people who are going to watch it on YouTube.